Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another eMarketer Tech Talk, where we host guests from all areas of ad tech, martech, and media. I'm Nancy Tefera Santos, Senior Vice President, eMarketer Insider Intelligence. Today, we have a great presentation. You're going to hear about how to make your customer journey uncomplicated, effective, and privacy forward. How do you like that? This is your opportunity to learn. We want it to be an educational journey. So please use the chat window to send in questions during the presentation, and I'll get to as many as I can during our Q&A. Now I want to introduce my special guest. I have with me today Laurel Rossi, CMO of Infillion. Laurel, welcome.
Thank you so much, Nancy, and I'm so happy to be here. Infillion is an advanced full-service media buying platform that focuses on captivating attention for agencies and ultimately brand partners, and for the best brands in the world. And so I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so happy to share my story today and our work at Infillion. I am a legacy marketer, and so I thought it would be really fun to kick off with a legacy brand that has been on the scene since around 1985. And we talk about fantastic startups today, but this was a startup back in the 80s. And Lunchables was really born out of a startup mentality around cultural insight. And the cultural insight was, what do working moms do when they start to go to work, not even back to work, but to work, when they are sandwiched between breakfast and having to prepare lunch for their kids. And so with that fantastic insight, we had an opportunity to really try to understand not only the insights around customer marketing, but also in a modern day environment, what's the journey to get to this kind of a purchase? Back then, the journey was quite simple. You created awareness using linear TV. You created some kind of pull mechanism, usually in store, and voila, there was shopping at a local retailer, et cetera, and the sale was made. And for a CPG product, not always simple because you've got to get those repeat purchases. One of the things that we want to talk about today is the customer journey and how complex and valuable it's really become, not only for CPG brands, but across many brands. We recently published an ebook that talks about the customer journey versus funnels. And that customer journey experiment has really been something that's produced phenomenal results across more than about 1,200 brands. And so let's imagine the Lunchables customer journey today and what it really looks like. A kid who took Lunchables to school in 1989 might be a parent of a young kid today. And that's really great for marketers because it taps into nostalgia and maybe a little bit into how they stress and de-stress as parents, as they consider different purchases. Lunchables has almost universal appeal and universal awareness. And one of the topics I love to talk about often for brands like this is, how do you stay out of the brand dead zone? How do you get awareness when everybody seems to know your brand? And so awareness today has really taken on many forms. And of course, digital transformation in the media, marketing, and advertising space has been a boon for creating awareness for all kinds of brands. But that journey is so much more complicated than it was so many years ago. If you think about where Lunchables was way back when, with a 3-step journey, it was probably a lot different with all the choice that's available to you today. And also when you consider online purchases as part of the process. And so consideration tends to be a really full time for all kinds of marketers. And as we unpack that journey for the consumer, we understand how at each point along the journey, you must examine the experiences. For Lunchables, there have been many things that are captivating for potential consumers. Women do not have the same journey, and it may not be a woman at all who's actually packing a lunch. And in fact, some of the shin kicking that's happening, if you want to call it that, for children and among young adults is a big part of that consideration in the journey. And so Lunchables, a longtime partner of ours, has done some really fascinating things to grab attention. when you think about it, with COPA rules and things like that relate to how regulated kid advertising is, there have to be captivating ways to gain attention that go beyond a pure sale. And so what Lunchables has done is really tried to capture attention by tapping into that cultural zeitgeist. Think about the creator economy and how engaged children are today. Look what Lunchables did to move the needle. In a couple of big US cities like Chicago, they built installations like this giant chicken nugget bear at the Lincoln Park Zoo. You can read a bunch about that. There's a fantastic article about that. And there are places where not only kids go, but also their parents who are unbelievably familiar with the Lunchables brand. There we go. And so one of the things that I want to do is to talk a little bit about how we captivate these customers along that journey in the consideration phase. We had the distinct privilege, and this is the only time I'm going to talk about the Infillion part of this experiment. We had the great privilege of working with the Lunchables clients, not only to have them focus on the consideration phase, but also to engage customers in a way for this brand that has 100% brand awareness in the actual advertising experience to make sure they were paying attention. And that kind of captivation is something that you need to focus on throughout the customer journey. This was one of the early pilots of a product that we call Infillion X, where you can actually go from CTV to rich media, et cetera, and engage the client. And so with that, I think we want to play for you something that we did that was built on an engagement ad and a brand ad spot.
She's eating the rocket.
Copy that. She is eating the rocket.
I assume we needed that?
Lunchables! Built to be eaten! She has eaten the rocket. Over.
Following the ad, we built a game for kids that they could play as part of the experience as well. And so this was actually one of the early pilots, as I mentioned before, of something called Infillion X, which is a single unit multi-channel ad that's powered by first-party data. And we can incorporate a retargeting campaign across display media. Some of these campaigns actually give us the opportunity not only to create that kind of engagement during the consideration phase, but also during the shopping period by allowing you to put something into a shopping cart, either for a Target or a Walmart, et cetera. And so as I relate it back to the customer journey, one of the things that I want to point out, aside from the fun of the Tetris game with stackable Lunchables, is that we have the opportunity today to hover in the consideration phase for as long as it takes to get a consumer to pay attention. And ultimately, what we're looking for is that kind of loyalty and repurchase that we can now measure by using data. In our ebook, we explored the focus of advertisers today and what it really takes to make a brand memorable and also to capture the entirety of the purchase journey. And we did that by understanding some of the obstacles that our marketers are facing when it comes to using technology and really trying to navigate the orchestration of a full customer journey. And some of the things that we heard that we thought were super insightful were, it really is a full-time job keeping up with the capabilities of what's up and coming. How do I know what's available from a data targeting perspective? How do I actually make retargeting work for me in such a way that I'm not only compliant, but I'm also being motivating to a customer and actually not turning off a long-term customer? Additionally, we heard things like, one problem that advertisers have from agencies is the disparate nature of all of the screens and trying to bring together all of these things in one place. Anybody can help orchestrate a single ecosystem. However, making all the elements work together is problematic. And so one of the things that we've spent a lot of time thinking about is how do we make the user experience not just for the customer understandable and easy to navigate, but also for the advertisers and for their agency partners. There are a lot of middlemen involved today. If you think about the digital ecosystem and all the things that you're navigating along the journey, orchestration of the customer journey can be something that we thought during the digital transformation phase would be a much less expensive way to go to market, right? Digital media is far less expensive than traditional media in some ways. And so when I'm thinking about it, if I have all these fixed costs around all the middlemen involved in putting technology into play, what am I actually gaining? And so I think as part of our ebook, one of the things that we've explored is how do we solve some of these problems? I'd love to hear some of the queries that you might have about customer journey orchestration that you've been thinking about, if you could pop them into the chat along the way. It wasn't too hard for us to believe that at Infillion, being able to form a transparent but also a highly orchestrated media platform was going to be one solve for customers. And so, we had gone through a number of mergers ourselves, and in thinking about our own experience and our own journey in activating what we wanted to be a flawless user experience for our customers, we had to really think about the end user. And so one of the things that I feel that going forward we need to do is follow a simple set of ground rules. And we've put these together, and I'm sure there are others that you're considering. One is to think past a simple post-omnichannel world. What does that mean? One of the reasons why it may seem that things suddenly got more complicated for marketers really quickly is that in a post-COVID world, the consumer actually became much more complicated, right? We had less predictability about whether or not they were going to go to a store, they were going to shop online. And in this post-COVID and in a post-omnichannel environment, you have to think about being able to predict what a customer really wants and is looking to do. Buy online, pick up in store was the next best thing for the longest time. But we actually learned that 55% of millennials and 50% of Gen Z visit a physical location when shopping for routine purchases. And so that sort of turns on its head many of the original assumptions about how consumers actually purchase. The second thing I wanted to talk about, and one of our great lessons learned, has been that a seamless customer journey requires a very decluttered approach to marketing. We know that the average marketer needs to use a vast amount of software, and their tech stacks are highly complicated. There are 30 parts to the tech stack. For some marketers, there are 50, 100 tech stacks for others. One of the things that we need to think about is how do we make that tech stack a lot simpler? And so from a media perspective, one of the things that I think you're seeing in the marketplace is a much more seamless approach to marketing. We encourage our clients to take advantage of a much more seamless approach to media planning, as an example. This is just one example where measurement, data capture, data buying, creative, and also the actual inventory and media planning itself all resonant in one platform. One of the things that we encourage our clients to think about also is not only who are you working with, but is what you're doing working today. 50% of our clients come to us, and I'm sure to our partners, because what they're doing today is perceived as not working. And so what we know is that being able to measure all along the customer journey is super important to understanding whether your work is working. So at large, we are not in a post-omnichannel world where we say unilaterally something worked or didn't work. We're actually in the phase where we can diagnose at every part of the customer journey what is working and what isn't working. And so to have a decluttered approach to that analysis process is super important. What I would encourage you to do is not think about unilaterally whether it's working or not, but also to think about what is working and what is not along the customer journey itself. And there are a phenomenal number of tips, not only in our ebook, but in the marketplace at large. We work with eMarketer a lot on this kind of knowledge around how you can understand better and diagnose what's happening in journey orchestration. The third thing is we really encourage marketers to be proactive, not reactive. As an example, there are an enormous number of regulations coming down. We understand that privacy, pick a kids category as an example. We know that there are tons of restrictions, and understanding what those things are, and also being able to predict what's going to happen in the future by staying on top of it and having partners that stay on top of it are incredibly important. We know that data regulation is already being enforced in California starting July 1st. We also know that 5 new states are coming and potentially 2 more. At some point, understanding federal regulations when they come to pass will be super important. But even outside the regulatory environment, there are lots and lots of opportunities to be proactive about what you can do with data, as an example, and what you cannot do. I know I mentioned data a minute ago in the context of regulation, but we know that 73% of marketers say customer data makes their marketing more complex, but 82% say it also makes it more effective. The era of having unilateral sets of data is over. We know that what happens in an interaction that may have just happened a moment ago could be as important to the customer journey in terms of data management as longstanding loyalty data. And so one of the things I would encourage you to do is think about your data as something that's more dynamic and something that you actually can manage as part of the journey orchestration process. Obviously, in an ideal world, every single touch point along that customer journey that we've been talking about that is cataloged is part of the experience and something that you need to capture. And finally, just part of the learnings, among others, is that you can learn from the little guys. One of the things that I was fascinated by recently and big proponent of is learning that, as an example, small independent agencies are growing 3 times as fast as big agencies. So what does that mean, and why is that important to us? The days of scale being the definer of how well the customer journey goes is over, because it's really about looking at the customer journey in a holistic way. And so if I'm an agency, and smaller agencies tend to manage every part of the process, the creative part of the process, the data part of the process, and the media part of the process, having that holistic view of the customer journey, or at least the tools to be able to manage that orchestration, is incredibly important. And so most recently, we had the good fortune of talking at the Magnet Conference, which is a collection of small agencies. And I learned so much about journey orchestration when listening to some of the agency partners talk about how they had grown up startup companies from beginning to end. And so I think that we have to look everywhere for clues today in terms of how to really manage customer orchestration. And because of digital media, it's all become incredibly important, affordable. And so in conclusion, and some of the focus today has been on an example of customer orchestration along the journey, which has become so complex by using a legacy brand. But I could apply the same learnings across the board to a brand that also is a new startup. Creating awareness may be more important to that new brand, but the consideration phase is probably the same based on who your customer is. And so that consideration phase, what we are finding, has become incredibly important to the ultimate success of how things happen in terms of loyalty and advocacy in the long run. And, while I'm thinking about loyalty and advocacy, a funnel generally stops at the purchase phase. And one of the reasons we're big proponents and very excited about elaborate customer journey orchestration is that it really incorporates the loyalty and advocacy phase. What it could be better in the era of social media than having advocates for your brand? We know that that is a much cheaper way to acquire a customer in the end. And also for brands that are more transactional, like in CPG, a much better way to guarantee that successful follow-on purchase. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy, who I think is going to gather some questions. And I encourage you all to pop some questions into the chat and also to download our ebook and be comfortable, contacting us and letting us know if you have any more questions. So Nancy.
Thank you so much, Laurel. I love this. And it's so important to think of the journey as so many touch points versus that funnel. I know when I was reading your ebook, there were so many things that I picked up on and I was like, okay, this is spot on. We really have to change our thinking here. And I'm going to read from the ebook because I like some of these points that you guys made, that the journey is a broader concept encompassing the entire experience across all of those touch points, like you pointed out, from sales to design to staff to customer service and so forth. But I like this because it really makes you think that, life there's so many components that come through. And in the ebook, you guys say, from the consumer perspective, journeys are often circular and non-linear because real life is complex and messy. How true is that? And how many things come into our purchasing decisions that can change our loyalty? So I encourage everybody to read the ebook. It has a lot of even extended information that Laurel shared today, but thank you so much. I love this, and so did our audience because we have some great questions. So I'm going to move on to those. How's that?
Perfect.
All righty. So our first question, Laurel, is how is out of home changing for marketers, and can you easily include out of home in your digital first buys?
Yeah. Great question. We have the great privilege of owning a company called InStadium. And while InStadium is not emblematic of all out-of-home businesses, it's a real-life fan experience business, so advertising in stadiums. And one of the things that we've found is that the long tail on out-of-home is really fantastic for the customer journey. And what do I mean by that? You can have a real life fan experience in a stadium, which seems, very analog, but with all of the opportunities in an arena, as an example, to be able to get someone to opt in, could be a QR code, it could be a, SMS, et cetera. You have the opportunity to continue that journey for a good long time. And so digital out of home in general has been powerfully important in terms of really creating awareness. And of course, if you're using location as part of your strategy, you have a tremendous opportunity to be highly relevant to somebody on a place-based basis. I love the fact that out of home today has really flipped everything on its head in terms of being highly effective, not only from a location perspective, but also from a digital perspective and getting me to act almost on the spot. I think the long tail of out of home has been tremendous. And think about, mobile devices, of course.
Yeah. Thank you. Mobile devices in stadium is very interesting. I'm going to think of you every time. I don't know if you know, but so many of my travels or vacations revolve around stadiums. So I love the stadium experience. It's so full of emotions, and it's so much fun to see fans across the nation and the world. Our next question is, what is the biggest challenge that marketers face when it comes to connecting with real humans through meaningful creative, and how can they overcome any of the challenges?
Yeah, I think that, there have been so many great examples of late. Obviously, in experiential, we were just talking about out of home, that is sort of the ultimate opportunity to really captivate and engage. And so I find that marketers are really trying to engage more than they are trying to just capture attention. But if you think about, what's happened over the past several years with streaming as an example, you might, I I love and don't love talking about this example. You might think about an ad pod. You're watching your favorite show on, name a publisher, any Netflix, and you now have the opportunity, either to watch the ad or skip the ads. You may not have the opportunity to skip the ads, but one of the things that we know is for consumers who are opting into a 4-minute ad break, they're using it potentially to go to the bathroom, 2/3 of them. I mean, as crass as that sounds, the fact of the matter is we know that we have to do something far more engaging and captivating in order to get customers to really pay attention. And so if you were thinking about the Lunchables example, obviously, we were trying to grab that engagement by involving someone in the spots themselves. Is that appropriate for every ad? I'd probably say yes, but more important, I think the idea is that 2/3 of customers say they're not paying attention to ads today because they're not entertaining them and they're not capturing their attention in terms of what the end benefit is. So I think if you focus on those two things, there's a greater chance that your ad will be effective over the long run. And of course, we know from working with our measurement partners that being able to tell you today whether or not something actually ends in an actual purchase is possible. And so it really depends. Engagement is one aspect of it and relevance, but the other is if you're really looking to engage all the way through to the conversion, you have to put the measurement tools in place.
Okay, thank you. And Laurel, you were talking about regulations. Specifically, you mentioned California, July 1st, some more regulations coming into play. We have a question from the audience. How do you think regulatory shakeups will impact advertisers in the long term? And what could be done to prepare for all these industry changes?
Yeah, let me answer that in two parts. One of them is to say, one of the reasons that we dove so deeply into customer journey mapping, and this is just scratching the surface. And if you went sector by sector, you'd have amazing examples, of course, and all different points in the journey to talk about. But let me just start by saying the customer journey does one thing and forces you from a regulatory perspective into the mindset of the customer. And so I just finished talking about engagement. I just finished talking about elaborate journey. All advertising and data will be opt-in. It's going to be person first. It's going to be person centered. It will no longer be device centered. It won't be about, connecting a bunch of devices. It's going to be, did I get that permission from the customer to use their data to begin with? And so what I love about the journey is once I understand that I have somebody who's already interested in some way, however they've opted in, I have a better opportunity of engaging them all the way throughout. And it's a constant reminder to marketers that I need to not only have their permission, but that permission is going to give me an opportunity to really engage them as a customer. So that's part one of the answer. Part two is I do think we have to be proactive about it. We have a very simple rule that is very complex on the inside at Infillion, and that is we will only do work that is respectful of consumers' time, attention, and privacy. And so I think that the regulatory environment obviously speaks to that, and we're speaking to that environment as well. I'm thinking that it is not going to be as easy to share data in the future. We're already seeing that. We're seeing some data is now that was not even considered PII. It's considered sensitive PII today. So if I can attach information to somebody just by inference, that's not good enough. I need their overt buy-in for that. And so I think we're going to see more and more of that. I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the year, we would have many more states than the 5 states that have mentioned regulation engaged in that conversation. And then at that point, you have to start thinking about, is this going to be federally regulated?
Okay, fantastic. Laurel, your insights are incredible. We have a handful, so many more questions coming in. So to our audience, please keep sending in these great questions. Really appreciate it. Laurel, you talked about small agencies growing 3 times faster than large agencies. That was definitely eye-opening to me. One question that we have from our audience is, how can smaller advertisers and these agencies take a more proactive role to shape the future of our industry?
Yeah, I think that obviously we're all in service of our marketers and advertisers who really want to do great work and, obviously economically gain. But I think there are two things that say the smaller agencies can do. Number one is really find your way to the stage, find your way to public forums to share your learning, share your case studies. I think this is super important. I think that holistic view of a marketer's plan that smaller agencies have traditionally had is super important. And there's so much more knowledge sharing in our industry that's available through blogs and obviously through, publications. I think that knowledge sharing is incredibly important. The other thing that I was thinking about as it relates to the smaller agencies is that the cost of media, the minimums, the buy-in, the way to get into some of what used to be bigger mediums has now collapsed, right? You don't have to have a $50 million budget, to be in streaming. And so I think as those experiences accelerate, so will the case study examples from some of the smaller agencies.
Okay. And in your journey map, you showed there's so many touch points for the consumers. So we have a question from our audience. How do the shoppers feel about all these advertising touch points? Do you have any kind of data that shows whether the reception has been positive, negative, or indifferent?
Yeah. Well, let me start by saying I think the consumer is completely overwhelmed. I don't just because all these things are available to us doesn't necessarily mean that we have to take advantage of every single one. And part of the story around, customer visioning and customer journey orchestration is really to be very choiceful about which points along the way are going to be the most impactful, and not just to end sales, but also to the customer in terms of being most useful. Because I think the short-term view would be, how do I capture that sale once? The longer-term view would be, how do I create an advocate, right? And so when I'm thinking about that, I want to collect my insights along the way in market research and however you're building your customer journey mapping. I want to capture those insights that are going to get me to the longer-term view. What's my LTV for that customer versus how do I get a one-time sale?
Great. Thank you. And you talked a lot about data. Can you speak more specifically about the positive impact data has had on marketing in terms, has it improved cost per deliverables, engagement rates? What can you share?
Yeah. I think everybody's upfront investment in their data strategy is probably a fixed cost that's going to be a reality going forward. And so as we talk about, what data brings to the table economically, I think you have to consider, we were talking, I mentioned earlier, I think I said this articulately, but I'm not 100% sure, that, the average data stack is made up of, 30 different pieces of software or vendors or what have you. That's a fixed cost, right? And that's something we really have to think about. And so what I'd say is the long-term value of data is irreplaceable, right? It will give you that kind of insight. It will give you that kind of performance. It will also give you the opportunity to be very selective about how you action your very expensive, brand strategy or media or marketing strategy. But the upfront commitment to the fixed cost of putting a cogent data strategy together is the most costly, but also the most important piece of the pie.
Okay, thank you. And we have one last question here. So I think, podcasts have been on the rise, big part of everybody's daily life, as well as smart speakers. What are your thoughts on digital audio as a medium for awareness along the journey?
Oh, I so love this question. I was just talking to somebody last night about this. Audio, boy, this is a big statement. I'm not sure if it's too grandiose, but audio has been a big part of our lives for a long time. And then it kind of fades out of favor and then back into the picture and all of that. That's a big generalization. But,
Audio is extremely powerful. I mean, isolating a sense in some ways is a very powerful way to market. It's also a great way to reach portions of the population. And this isn't something that I talked about earlier. I'm very focused on, diversity in terms of how we approach our media strategies. And when you think about, people who are not sighted, as an example, audio is super important to them. But I think podcasts in general have created an area of focus and a way to really get under the skin of what's happening in a customer journey, because that selectivity about podcasts, what podcasts people choose, is a very important data point along the way in the customer journey to understanding what leads to a purchase as well. And so I think that audio marketing today is so sophisticated. I think that it took the music industry, as an example, a very long time to figure out their own customer journey and how to monetize that. But thank goodness we seem to be on a much better path today. And I think that even listening to those signals, has been a great way for the music industry to be back in a very powerful place in terms of being influential in our lives. And just one last thing I'll say about podcasting. I do think that podcasting has also brought back the fantastic element of celebrity, right? If you think about it, we focused on celebrity as a big part of our advertising strategy, for the past 70 years. It's been amazing. When you think about Super Bowl ads, et cetera, no shortage there. But I think that podcasts have also not only brought creators and influencers and all those good things to the table, but also the power of star power as well.
Yeah. I agree. And one of the things I love about digital audio is just the authenticity. So I listen every Sunday to the Sounds of Sinatra. Sid Mark, he passed away last year. And there's a Cento commercial that's, thank you, Cento, for being the longest running advertiser in the Sounds of Sinatra. And then it goes into the Cento commercial. And I just laugh because anytime I'm in the sauce aisle at the superstore, his beautiful, just Sunday voice that has so much emotions to me goes through my mind. So there's so much that comes into play for digital audio.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, no, please. Thank you so much for sharing all of your insights with us. This was fantastic. We really appreciate it. Before we wrap up, let me take a moment and tell everybody what's happening around eMarketer's media channels. Mark your calendar for June 2nd for Attention. That is our half-day live virtual summit. This time, we're going to focus on CTV and other timely digital trends. Registration is open on our events page. You can also register for more upcoming live analyst and tech talk webinars at emarketer.com/webinars. And on the audio side of the house, we also have a podcast. We actually have 3. Behind the Numbers, Reimagining Retail, as well as the Banking and Payment Show. So please check those out. Keep an eye on your email. We're going to send out a link to the recording for today's presentation. This was fabulous. The presentation was incredible. All these questions that came in from our audience, thank you. This was really great conversation, great insights. I also want you to check out that ebook from Infillion, Examining the New Customer Journey. I learned a lot from it. I know you will as well. Laurel, thanks again to you and the entire team at Infillion, and we'll see everybody on our next Tech Talk. Thank you. Bye-bye.